On a warm and sunny August 8, 2024, a group of surfers enjoyed a perfect morning at Cocoa Beach, Florida, a popular spot known for its vibrant surfing community. The waves were ideal, and the beach was crowded with locals and tourists alike. 4 friends who had been surfing together for years were among the surfers: Jake, Lucas, Mia, and Rachel. They had grown up near the coast, and surfing had always been their favorite way to spend the weekend. Jake, the oldest at 28, had been surfing since he was a teenager. He was the most experienced person in the group and often acted as the unofficial leader, guiding the others on how to catch the best waves. Lucas, 26, was a laid-back guy with a passion for photography, always carrying his camera to capture moments after their surf sessions. Mia, 25, was the youngest but just as skilled as the rest. She had a fearless approach to the ocean, always eager to push her limits. Finally, Rachel, 27, balanced a busy job in the city but hit the waves whenever possible. Surfing was more than a hobby for them. It was a way of life. The group paddled out that morning, riding the gentle waves and enjoying the warm water. Cocoa Beach was a favorite among surfers with its wide, sandy shoreline and steady surf. But recently, unusual activity had started to surface in the water. Local reports of black-tip shark sightings had begun to surface, though the surfers were used to coexisting with marine life and didn't think much of it. Black-tip sharks were common in Florida waters, but generally not aggressive. As the group paddled further out, they prepared to catch a wave when suddenly, Mia noticed something strange in the water. A dark shadow moved swiftly and silently beneath the surface. At first, she thought it might be a large fish, but then she saw the unmistakable fin slicing through the water. She froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Before anyone could react, chaos erupted. A black-tip shark about 6 feet long shot up from the water near Lucas, bumping his board and sending him off balance. He quickly scrambled back on his board, panic in his eyes. The shark circled the group, its movements rapid and aggressive. The once peaceful surf zone had turned into a nightmare. The others paddled frantically, trying to get back to shore, but the shark was fast, darting between them. Rachel felt a sharp bump against her leg as the shark brushed past her. She screamed in pain and fear, realizing that the animal was now targeting them. The blacktip's behavior was unlike anything they had experienced before. It was agitated, and the surfers were now fighting to escape. Jake, realizing the seriousness of the situation, tried to calm the group and guide them toward the shore, but the shark wasn't backing off. It circled them again, its dorsal fin breaking the surface, creating a sense of dread as it stayed close to the group. The blacktip shark circled relentlessly, its movement swift and unpredictable. Now fully aware of the danger, the surfers paddled with all their strength toward the shore. The peaceful morning had turned into a frantic race against time. Still in pain from the shark's earlier bump, Rachel struggled to keep up. Her heart raced, but she pushed through, knowing that getting to shore was the only way to escape. Jake stays close to Rachel, and his instincts tell him not to leave anyone behind. Lucas and Mia were just ahead, but the shark lurked beneath the surface, its dorsal fin cutting through the water ominously. The shark moved closer again, darting between the boards. Mia glanced back, her eyes wide with fear as the predator seemed to target the group again. Without warning, the shark bumped Lucas's board again, causing him to lose his balance nearly. This time, the shark wasn't just curious, it was behaving aggressively, something no one had expected from a species typically known for avoiding human interaction. The water seemed colder, the sun now hidden behind a cloud as the group fought against both fear and fatigue. As they got closer to the shore, the shark's movements slowed. The shallow water gave them a slight advantage, but they weren't out of danger yet. The beach, bustling with activity just moments before, was full of people shouting and waving, trying to warn others in the water. Lifeguards whistled, signaling everyone to leave the water as quickly as possible. With every stroke, the shore came closer. Finally, Mia reached the shallow waters, jumping off her board and running onto the sand. Lucas was behind her, exhausted but relieved to feel the solid ground beneath his feet. Jake and Rachel followed, both struggling but determined to make it out. The shark, now deterred by the shallow waters, disappeared into the deeper ocean, leaving the surfers shaken but alive. On the beach, the surfers collapsed onto the sand, breathing heavily, their bodies trembling from the adrenaline and the exertion. Lifeguards rushed to their side, checking for injuries. Rachel's leg was bruised and sore from the impact with the shark, but it wasn't life-threatening. The group sat silently, still trying to process what had just happened. In the days that followed, the incident sparked concern throughout the community. Marine biologists were brought in to study the unusual behavior of the black-tip sharks. Some believed that the shark's aggressive actions resulted from environmental changes, possibly due to warmer waters or shifting food sources caused by climate change. The increased blacktip activity off the coast raised questions about how human recreation and wildlife could coexist in the changing ocean environment. The surfers' experience made them more cautious but didn't lessen their passion for the ocean. They understood the water was home to many unpredictable creatures. While the incident had shaken them, their love for the sea remained strong. However, they would always carry with them the memory of that morning, a reminder of the raw power of nature and the delicate balance between humans and the world beneath the wave. On March 16, 2024, a commercial diving team was working in the pristine waters off the coast of New Zealand, near the town of Kaikoura. The team had been contracted to work on underwater infrastructure projects, repairing and maintaining critical pipelines that ran deep beneath the ocean's surface. This group of highly skilled divers, all veterans of underwater construction, had years of experience navigating the challenges of working in these waters. But on this day, something unexpected would test their skills in a way they had never imagined. The team was led by Tom Reed, a seasoned commercial diver in his early 40s. With over 2 decades of experience, Tom had earned a reputation for staying calm under pressure. Beside him was Karen Doyle, a marine engineer who had been with the company for nearly a decade. She was meticulous and had a sharp eye for detail, ensuring every aspect of their work went smoothly. Also on the team were Lucas Turner, a younger diver in his late 20s who was eager to learn, and Dave Morrow, a former naval officer who had transitioned into commercial diving after his military career. The waters around Kaikoura were known for their biodiversity, home to abundant marine life including sharks. The team had worked in these conditions before and understood the risks of the job. However, they were also aware that in most cases, marine life would keep its distance from human activity. On that particular morning, the divers descended into the clear blue waters, preparing to work on a critical section of the pipeline. Their tools, equipment, and breathing apparatuses were all in place as they began their routine. As the team worked underwater, the calm atmosphere started to change. Tom, who was monitoring the area, noticed something unusual. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a large shadow moving in the distance. At first, he thought it was just one of the many fish that swam through these waters. But as the shadow moved closer, it became clear that this was no ordinary fish. A large dusky shark, known for its territorial behavior, had entered the area. Tom signaled to the rest of the team, alerting them to the shark's presence. The dusky shark, easily over 8 feet long, circled the area where the divers worked. It wasn't just passing through, it was watching them. Its sleek body moved gracefully, but the shark's movements were deliberate. Dusky sharks are known to be territorial, especially when something disturbs their environment, and the team's equipment and activity likely caught the shark's attention. The divers stayed calm, but there was an undeniable tension in the water. Karen, closest to the shark, slowly backed away from her position, keeping an eye on the predator. The shark's presence disrupted their work, forcing the team to reconsider how to proceed. They couldn't abandon the project, but the risk grew each minute. The shark wasn't leaving, and its movements were becoming more assertive. As the shark circled closer, Tom made a quick decision. They needed to get out of the water, regroup, and figure out a plan to continue their work without endangering themselves. The dusky shark circled ever closer, its territorial nature becoming more apparent with each pass. The divers remained calm but alert, knowing that the predator was not showing signs of leaving. Understanding the risk, Tom Reed gestured to the team, signaling them to ascend slowly. Karen, Lucas, and Dave followed his lead, each moving carefully to avoid startling the shark. The journey back to the surface felt longer than usual, the shark's presence adding a tense weight to every moment. The dusky shark followed them part way, its sleek body cutting through the water. But eventually, it turned away as the divers neared the safety of the boat. Once they broke the surface, the team climbed aboard, relieved to be out of the water but fully aware that their work was far from over. Back on the boat, Tom gathered the team to discuss their options. They had a job to finish, but the shark's territorial behavior had disrupted their operations. Reviewing their equipment, Karen pointed out that they couldn't risk returning to the water with the shark nearby. They needed a plan, and fast, as delays would only increase the challenges of completing the project on time. Eager to continue the work, Lucas suggested using sonar to monitor the shark's position. The team had equipment that could track large marine animals, and it might give them the advantage of knowing when the shark was at a safe distance. Tom agreed that it was worth a try. They deployed the sonar, and soon the steady ping of the equipment gave them real-time information about the shark's movements. The shark circled the area but remained further from their dive site. The team watched closely, waiting for the right moment to descend again. After a tense hour, the shark's movements became less aggressive and drifted further from the area. Tom decided they couldn't wait much longer. They suited up and prepared to return to the underwater site, knowing that the shark could return any time. The team descended cautiously, their eyes constantly scanning the water around them. The next few hours were spent working as efficiently as possible, repairing the pipeline while staying aware of their surroundings. Though still nearby, the shark kept its distance, allowing the divers to continue their work. The team moved quickly, finishing the necessary repairs and securing the equipment. It wasn't until the last piece of the job was completed that the shark made its presence known again, circling closer as if it had been waiting for the right moment. Recognizing the renewed threat, Tom signaled for the team to ascend. They reached the surface without incident, but the tension remained as they climbed back onto the boat. Watching from below, the shark had clarified that this was its territory. In the aftermath of the encounter, the team reflected on the delicate balance between human activity and the natural environment. They had completed their mission, but the shark's territorial behavior reminded them of the unpredictable nature of working in the ocean. It was a lesson for Tom and his crew in respect for the marine world and its inhabitants. The incident also sparked discussions about better managing future projects in shark-inhabited waters, ensuring both safety and preserving the natural environment they worked in. On the night of October 12, 2024, a group of adventurous scuba divers gathered on a small boat just off the coast of Gansbai, South Africa. This location, often called the Great White Shark Capital of the world, was famous for its large population of these apex predators. The group was there for a night dive, hoping to study the nocturnal behaviors of great white sharks. It was a rare opportunity, and they were all eager to get into the water, unaware of the terrifying experience that awaited them. Dr. Paul Harris, a marine biologist who had spent years studying sharks, led the group. He deeply respected these creatures and had dived with great whites many times. With him were three other experienced divers: Lisa Carter, a wildlife photographer known for her daring underwater shots; Mark Evans, a former Navy diver who now worked as a guide for extreme dives; and Jessica Lee, a graduate student researching shark behavior. Each of them had reasons for joining this expedition, but they all shared a fascination with the ocean's most fearsome predator. The moon cast a pale glow over the water as the divers suited up and prepared to descend into the dark depths. The ocean was calm, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. Night dives were always risky, especially in shark-infested waters. The divers knew great whites could behave unpredictably at night, but their excitement and curiosity drove them forward. As the group descended into the inky black water, the beam of their underwater lights cut through the darkness, revealing the ghostly shapes of fish and the occasional flicker of a distant shark. The team moved slowly, staying close together as they ventured deeper, scanning the waters for signs of the great white sharks they had come to observe. Everything was calm at first, and the strange beauty of the ocean enthralled the divers at night. However, the calm didn't last long. At the front of the group, Dr. Harris suddenly felt a shift in the water. He turned, his light catching the massive silhouette of a great white shark swimming toward them. At first, the shark seemed uninterested, gliding past them with slow, deliberate movements. The team watched in awe, but their admiration quickly turned to fear as the shark circled back, this time moving faster and closer. The great white, a rogue male over 15 feet long, had become agitated. Its body language had changed, no longer passive. It moved with sharp, erratic movements, clearly on edge. Sensing the danger, the divers tried to remain calm, but the shark wasn't backing off. It circled the group tighter, its massive form looming in the darkness, its white belly illuminated by their lights. Suddenly, the shark rushed toward Mark, knocking him sideways. The impact sent a wave of panic through the group. Mark struggled to regain his balance as the shark turned for another pass, this time even more aggressive. The divers knew they had to get out of the water, but the rogue great white wasn't giving them an easy way out. The shark's aggression intensified, and the divers knew they were in danger. Still disoriented from the shark's sudden hit, Mark struggled to regain control of his breathing. The others could see the fear in his eyes as they tried to stay close, their lights casting eerie beams through the dark water. Now circling even faster, the great white shark appeared more agitated with each pass. The predator saw them not as observers, but as intruders in its territory. Dr. Harris motioned for the group to begin their ascent, knowing that staying in the water any longer would only increase the chances of an attack. The problem was that the shark was not giving them space to retreat. As they cautiously moved upward, the shark darted closer, its large body slicing through the water with terrifying speed. It brushed past Jessica, the youngest of the group, and her heart raced as the predator's rough skin grazed her arm. The divers knew they had to control their movements, but the tension was almost unbearable. Lisa, the wildlife photographer, managed to steady herself, holding her camera tightly as she tried to document the situation in case they needed evidence later. However, the shark's rapid movements made it impossible to focus on anything other than survival. The ascent felt painfully slow, every second dragging as the divers climbed toward the surface. When they thought they had created some distance, the shark made another sudden charge. This time it aimed straight for Dr. Harris, its massive jaws opening wide in a terrifying display of power. The experienced marine biologist swerved at the last second, narrowly avoiding the predator's powerful bite. The group finally broke the surface of the water, gasping for air. But their ordeal wasn't over yet. The boat was still a few meters away, and the shark wasn't backing down. It swam just below them, its dorsal fin slicing through the water as it circled. The divers, exhausted and scared, paddled furiously toward the boat, knowing that reaching it was their only chance of escaping unharmed. As they reached the boat, the crew quickly pulled them aboard, their hearts pounding as they looked back at the water. The great white shark, now calmer, drifted away into the depths, its territorial display over. The divers collapsed on the deck, breathing heavily, each of them feeling the weight of what they had just survived. In the days that followed, the team reflected on the dive. The shark's unpredictable behavior had turned what was supposed to be an exciting research mission into a terrifying struggle for survival. For Dr. Harris and the others, the experience forced them to reconsider their approach to studying apex predators. They had always respected the power of the great white sharks, but the close encounter showed them just how dangerous even a single rogue shark could be. The dive's aftermath left the team with a deeper appreciation for the risks involved in their work. They continued their research with a new understanding of the delicate balance between humans and the wild. The vast and unpredictable ocean reminded them of its power, and with their raw strength and instinct, the great white sharks had claimed their place as true rulers of the deep. It was a warm, quiet morning on August 12, 2001 in Boca Palms, a small coastal town in Florida. The beaches were mostly empty at this hour, with the sun just beginning to rise. For Eric Taylor, a 33-year-old local, this was his favorite time to swim. The water was calm, the air cool, and he enjoyed the peaceful solitude before the beach filled with people. Over the years, he had made this early morning dip a routine, often swimming alone in the shallow waters just off the coast. Eric parked his car and walked down the beach, feeling the sand between his toes as he headed toward the water. He wasn't a competitive swimmer, but strong and confident in the ocean. He had grown up by the beach, and the sea was like a second home. He waded into the water, sighing as the coolness refreshed him from the heat. There was no wind, no signs of danger, just the endless stretch of water inviting him farther out. Florida's waters were home to many sharks, though attacks were rare. Lemon sharks frequented these waters and were usually non-aggressive and avoided human contact. but they were also territorial. Lemon sharks were often hunted in the shallow waters where Eric was now swimming. Though they were not typically a threat, their powerful jaws could cause serious harm if provoked or threatened. As Eric swam out farther, unaware of the potential danger, he focused on his strokes, gliding smoothly through the water. He had the whole ocean to himself, or so he thought. The lemon shark lurking nearby, invisible beneath the surface, wasn't initially interested in attacking. It was simply moving through its territory, keeping to itself. But the swimmer's presence had caught its attention. Sharks, like many creatures of the sea, react based on instinct, and in this moment, the shark saw Eric as a possible threat to its space. The morning sun reflected on the water as Eric turned onto his back, floating momentarily to enjoy the stillness. His eyes closed, lost in the rhythm of the ocean's movement. He felt safe, unaware that the lemon shark was getting closer just below him, circling slowly, its dark silhouette blending with the sea floor. The sudden force hit Eric before he could even process what was happening. A sharp pain shot through his right leg as something latched onto him with crushing force. His body stiffened, and his instincts kicked in. This was no wave or cramp. It was something alive, powerful, and dangerous. As he twisted in the water, Eric saw the large, unmistakable shape of a lemon shark, its teeth buried deep into his leg. The pain was unbearable, a burning sensation as the shark's jaws tightened. Eric's scream through the ocean's vastness swallowed the sound. He flailed in the water, trying to break free, but the shark wasn't letting go. Its grip was firm, dragging him under as it thrashed, its powerful body moving with terrifying speed. Desperation took over as Eric punched and kicked at the shark with everything he had. His fists slammed into the shark's snout, a spot he knew could be sensitive. And for a brief second, the shark released him. Blood filled the water around him, and Eric's vision blurred as he tried to swim away, his legs searing with pain. But before he could get far, the shark returned, its predatory instincts kicking in as it closed in for another attack. The shark's teeth grazed his thigh this time, slicing through flesh but not clamping down as hard. Eric kicked out again, his foot connecting with the shark's side, pushing it away just enough to give him a chance to escape. His arms and legs moved frantically, pulling him toward the shore, the taste of salt water and blood heavy in his mouth. He could see the beach now, but it seemed impossibly far as the panic and pain coursed through his body. On the beach, a few early risers had noticed the commotion. A woman walking her dog had seen the splashing and the unusual movements in the water. Realizing something was wrong, she began shouting for help. Another man, a jogger, sprinted toward the water, knowing that whoever was out there didn't have much time. Eric's strength was fading fast. His leg felt on fire, and every stroke was a battle to keep himself afloat. He glanced back, fearing the shark would come for him again. But for now, it had disappeared into the depths. He didn't know if it would return, but he had no time to think about it. His only focus was on reaching the shore. When Eric finally felt the sand beneath his hands, he collapsed onto the beach, gasping for air. His leg was mangled, blood pouring from the deep gashes where the shark had bitten him. The jogger and the woman rushed to his side, frantically calling for an ambulance. Eric's body trembled as the shock began to set in, his mind racing as he replayed the attack in his head, trying to make sense of it. As the beach filled with onlookers, many stood in stunned silence, staring at the blood-streaked water where the shark had attacked. They couldn't believe what had just happened. For Eric, the physical pain was overwhelming, but the mental scars would last far longer. The ocean, once a place of peace for him, had become a nightmare in seconds. Eric survived the attack, but his leg would never fully heal, the bite leaving deep scars both on his skin and in his memory. He would later tell the story of that day, describing the terror he felt as the shark dragged him under and his helplessness in the face of such a powerful predator. The waters of Boca Palms remained beautiful, but for Eric, they always reminded him of how quickly nature could turn on you. He never swam alone again. The waters off Durban's South Africa coast had always been a favorite spot for seasoned spearfisher Paul Mitchell. On March 18, 2003, Paul, a 35-year-old with over a decade of spearfishing experience, was preparing for what he expected to be a successful day in the ocean. The South African coastline, known for its rich marine life, was home to an array of fish species and, as every diver knew, some of the ocean's largest predators. But Paul was confident, skilled, and had faced his share of close encounters. That day, he was accompanied by his longtime friend and fellow spearfisher, Greg Ellis. The two had been diving together for years, relying on each other for safety in deeper waters. Paul was the more experienced of the two, but Greg had learned quickly, becoming a strong partner on these trips. Their plan for the day was simple: dive deep, target larger fish, and return with a solid catch before the afternoon heat kicked in. The sun was already rising when they reached their favorite dive spot. The water was clear, with perfect visibility and mild currents. They geared up, adjusted their weight belts, checked their spears, and descended into the water. Paul led the way, his body moving effortlessly through the depths, the spear gun ready. His heart raced with the familiar thrill of the dive, and his mind focused on the task. Paul had chosen this spot because it was known for its rich population of game fish, particularly yellowfin tuna. The deeper waters here could be challenging, but they had always yielded good results, and today they seemed the same. As they descended, fish darted in and out of view, their bodies reflecting the light filtering through the water. After a few minutes of scouting, Paul spotted his target, a large tuna hovering just above the seabed. He signaled to Greg to stay back as he slowly raised his spear gun. The shot was perfect. The spear pierced the fish cleanly, and Paul felt the familiar tug as the fish tried to escape. Blood immediately spilled into the water, spreading quickly as Paul began pulling the catch toward him. His adrenaline spiked, the satisfaction of the perfect shot filling him with confidence. But beneath the surface, the ocean's predators were already responding to the scent of blood. Durban's waters were home to various shark species, and tiger sharks were among the most feared. Known for their size, strength, and aggression, tiger sharks were opportunistic hunters, attracted by movement and the scent of blood in the water. Paul had always respected the dangers of these waters, but today, the reality of the threat was about to become far more personal. As Paul wrestled with the tuna, he didn't notice the dark shape gliding silently through the water. The tiger shark had been lurking nearby, drawn by the blood cloud from Paul's recent kill. Its senses were finely tuned, detecting the slightest disturbance. And now, it was closing in. Paul felt a shift in the water before he saw the shark. A powerful current surged past him, and he instinctively looked around, his heart skipping a beat as his eyes locked onto the unmistakable silhouette of a tiger shark. It was massive, easily over 12 feet long, and heading straight for him. Panic gripped him momentarily, but his years of training kicked in. He knew exactly what to do. He released the line from his spear gun, letting the tuna drift away as a distraction. But the shark wasn't interested in the fish. It was focused on Paul, sensing both the blood and the movements of a new target. Paul's hand tightened around his spear as he began his ascent, kicking hard toward the surface, but he could feel the shark getting closer, its massive body slicing through the water with terrifying speed. Paul's mind raced. He knew the tiger shark was not a creature that would scare off easily. It was known for its persistence, especially once it had locked onto prey. He turned to face the shark, holding the spear gun out in front of him as a makeshift shield. The shark came in fast, its wide mouth lined with rows of sharp teeth visible as it closed the distance. With a sudden jolt, the shark struck. Its powerful head slammed into Paul, knocking him backward. The force of the impact sent him spiraling through the water, but he managed to keep hold of his spear gun. He kicked out, trying to distance himself, but the shark was relentless. It circled back, faster now, its eyes locked onto him as it prepared for another strike. Paul knew he had to act quickly. He aimed the spear gun at the shark's head, waiting for the right moment. As the shark lunged again, he fired. The spear struck just below its eye, not deep enough to kill, but enough to startle it. The shark thrashed, violently shaking its massive head. The spear lodged in its tough skin. Blood mixed with the water as the shark pulled back, disoriented for a moment. Paul didn't wait to see if the shot had done any lasting damage. He kicked upward with everything he had, his lungs burning as he raced toward the surface. The shark, though injured, wasn't giving up. It circled beneath him, slower now, but still dangerous. Paul could feel the water moving as the shark swam below him, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it attacked again. Greg was already there as he broke the surface, gasping for air, pulling him toward the boat. Paul scrambled aboard, his body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. They watched in horror as the shark's dorsal fin broke the surface, circling the boat for several more minutes before disappearing into the depths. Paul collapsed onto the deck, his breathing heavy, his heart racing. The close encounter had shaken him to his core. In all his years of spearfishing, he had never come face to face with such danger. The tiger shark had been relentless, and Paul knew he had been lucky to escape with his life. The day had started like any other for Simon Garrett, a professional diver with years of experience exploring the Great Barrier Reef. It was April 14, 2007, and Simon was alone, investigating a remote section of the reef known for its deep caves and narrow passages. The Great Barrier Reef, located off the northeastern coast of Australia, was one of the most breathtaking places Simon had ever dived. He had spent hours navigating its coral gardens and underwater tunnels, fascinated by the marine life that thrived there. On this particular day, Simon had chosen a new spot that he hadn't explored before. It was deeper, more isolated, and less frequented by tourists. The water was calm, and conditions were perfect for a long, quiet dive. Simon checked his gear, adjusted his mask, and descended into the blue. The familiar sensation of weightlessness took over as he swam downward. His air tank was full, and his dive computer showed plenty of time for exploration. He had always felt at peace in the water. The reef was like a second home to him, and Simon was confident in his abilities. His goal for the day was to explore a cave system hidden beneath layers of coral, rumored to be full of beautiful, untouched marine life. He ventured deeper, his flashlight cutting through the shadows as he entered the first tunnel. The coral walls shimmered, and schools of fish darted around him, making the cave come alive with movement. As Simon moved through the narrow passages, he took in the beauty of the place, losing track of time. Everything felt routine until he noticed something in the distance. A dark shape moved in the shadows ahead, just on the edge of his flashlight's beam. At first, Simon thought it might be a large fish or a stingray, but as he swam closer, he realized what it was. A reef shark resting in the narrow space, hidden among the coral. Reef sharks were common in the Great Barrier Reef. Unlike the more aggressive bull or tiger sharks, reef sharks were usually shy, often keeping their distance from divers. But they were also territorial, especially when disturbed in confined spaces like the cave Simon was now swimming through. Simon froze, his heart racing as the shark stirred, its sleek body shifting slightly in the tight space. The shark had been unaware of Simon's presence until now, but the disturbance was enough to set it on edge. The shark's movements became quicker, more erratic, and Simon knew he had to tread carefully. In the narrow confines of the cave, there was little room for error, and the shark now blocked the only exit. Simon's mind raced as he tried to stay calm. He knew sudden movements could provoke the shark. There was no way to swim around it in such a tight space. The shark turned slowly, its dark eyes fixed on Simon. It was a large one, at least 6 feet long, and its powerful body moved with grace, sending a wave of fear through him. Then, without warning, the shark charged. It moved with terrifying speed, its body slicing through the water toward Simon. He barely had time to react, pulling himself back against the cave wall, his heart pounding in his chest. The shark rushed past him so close he could feel the force of its movement. It didn't strike him, but its behavior was clear. It felt threatened, and Simon was trapped in its territory. The shark circled back, slower this time but still agitated. Simon's breathing became shallow as he tried to control his panic. His air supply was ticking down, and he knew he couldn't stay in the cave much longer. He had to find a way out before the shark attacked again. His spear gun, which he always carried for protection, was strapped to his side, but using it in such close quarters could provoke the shark further. Simon decided it was a last resort. The shark circled once more, its body gliding just inches from Simon as it passed. It was watching him, testing him, and Simon knew that any wrong move could trigger another charge. He slowly reached for his spear gun, keeping his movements as controlled as possible. The shark stopped circling, hovering before the exit, blocking his only way out. Simon's breathing became more rapid as the tension mounted. He was running out of options, and the shark wasn't moving. If he didn't act soon, he'd be out of the air with no clear escape. Taking a deep breath, Simon made his move. He pushed off the cave wall with a quick burst of energy, swimming toward the shark, hoping to spook it without forcing a confrontation. The shark reacted instantly, turning toward Simon with lightning speed, but instead of charging again, it darted away, its powerful body disappearing into the deeper water beyond the cave. Simon didn't waste a second. He swam as fast as he could toward the exit, his lungs burning as he kicked hard, pulling himself through the narrow opening. Once free from the cave, Simon ascended quickly, his chest tightening as his air supply dwindled. He broke the surface with a gasp, his body trembling from the adrenaline and the fear of what had just happened. The open water felt like a refuge, and he floated on his back momentarily, catching his breath and trying to process the terrifying encounter. Back on the boat, Simon sat quietly, replaying the event in his mind. He had come face to face with a reef shark in one of the most confined and dangerous situations imaginable, and lived to tell the tale. With all its beauty and wonder, the Great Barrier Reef also showed Simon how quickly things could go wrong. The ocean was a place he loved, but it was clear to him now that it held dangers he would never fully control. The heat wave of 2024 had gripped the Chesapeake Bay for weeks, pushing temperatures to record highs. By mid-July, the waters had warmed to levels that were nearly unheard of for the area. Normally, the Chesapeake Bay was home to crabs, oysters, and fish, with the occasional shark passing through during migration. But this year was different. The rising water temperatures had driven bull sharks, known for their aggression and ability to survive in both salt and fresh water, farther into the bay than anyone could remember. On July 23rd, John Latimer, a 55-year-old local fisherman, set out early in the morning from his small dock near the fictional coastal town of Point Barrow, Virginia. Like many others in the area, John had grown up on the bay, spending his days fishing its waters for blue crabs and stripers. Fishing was his livelihood, but it was also his escape. That morning, despite the stifling heat, John was determined to get out on the water before the sun became unbearable. He had heard rumors of increased shark sightings, but didn't think much of them. Bull sharks had been seen before, but they never caused much trouble. As John motored out into the bay, the stillness of the water struck him. The heat wave had driven many people away from the beaches, and the bay seemed emptier than usual. He cast his lines and waited, watching the horizon for any signs of movement. A few crabs and small fish nibbled at his bait, but nothing significant took hold. The hours passed slowly, and the heat became oppressive. John wiped the sweat from his brow, considering heading back in. He was about to pull up his lines when something heavy tugged on one of them. The sudden force nearly pulled the rod from his hands. John quickly tightened his grip, bracing himself against the side of his small boat. Whatever was on the other end of the line was massive, far larger than anything he had hooked before. His mind raced with excitement. Perhaps he had finally hooked a trophy fish. He started to reel it in, but the creature on the other end was fighting back, thrashing beneath the water's surface. Then, out of nowhere, the water around his boat erupted. A large gray shape surfaced, much larger than any fish he had ever seen. John's heart skipped a beat when he realized what it was. A bull shark, easily 8 feet long, was fighting against the line, its powerful body churning the water as it struggled. John had seen sharks before, but never this close, never this aggressive. The shark wasn't trying to escape, it was charging toward the boat. Before John could react, the shark lunged, slamming its body against the side of the boat with such force that the entire vessel rocked violently. He lost his footing and fell backward, hitting the deck hard. The boat tilted dangerously to one side as the shark continued to thrash, its tail slicing through the water with terrifying power. John scrambled to his feet, heart pounding as he tried to regain control of the situation. The bull shark was relentless. It rammed the boat again, its jaws snapping at the side of the vessel, tearing into the wooden planks with shocking ease. John grabbed for a nearby pole, desperate to fend off the shark, but the creature seemed unfazed. With each hit, the boat took on more water. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control, and John knew he needed to act fast if he wanted to survive. In a frantic attempt to save himself, John reached for his knife and cut the line that had hooked the shark. For a brief moment, the shark paused as if confused by the sudden lack of resistance, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it circled the boat, eyeing its prey with cold, calculating focus. John's boat was now damaged and sinking slowly. He knew he had to make it to shore. But the shark wasn't going to let him go easily. The shark struck again, this time hitting the boat so hard that John was thrown into the water. Panic surged through him as he splashed into the bay, his arms flailing as he tried to stay afloat. He could feel the water moving around him, the presence of the shark close by. His heart raced as he swam desperately toward the sinking boat, hoping to pull himself back on board. But the bull shark was faster. John felt something brush against his leg, a cold, rough touch that sent chills down his spine. Then, without warning, the shark struck. Its jaws clamped down on John's leg, the force of the bite sending a shock wave of pain through his body. He screamed, thrashing wildly as the shark dragged him beneath the water. Blood clouded the water around him, and for a moment John thought this was the end. But in a desperate act of survival, he kicked with his free leg, striking the shark's head repeatedly. The shark loosened its grip just enough for John to break free, and he swam with everything he had back to the boat. Grabbing the side of the boat, John hauled himself out of the water, his leg bleeding heavily. The shark circled below, waiting for another chance to strike, but John didn't give it the opportunity. With one last burst of energy, he started the engine and steered the damaged boat toward the shore. The boat limped through the water, slowly leaving the shark behind. As John neared the safety of the docks, the bull shark finally disappeared, sinking back into the depths of the bay. John's attack was the first, but it wouldn't be the last. Over the next several days, more bull sharks were spotted in the Chesapeake Bay, their presence drawing the attention of marine biologists and local authorities. The heat wave had driven the sharks closer to shore, their normal hunting grounds disrupted by the rising water temperatures. The normally peaceful bay had become a feeding ground for these aggressive predators, and the community was on edge. Marine biologists, including Dr. Sarah Delaney from the Chesapeake Marine Institute, began tracking the sharks' movements, hoping to understand what had caused the sudden surge in sightings. The warming waters caused by the prolonged heat wave were altering the sharks' behavior, pushing them into areas where they had rarely been seen before. Dr. Delaney and her team worked closely with local authorities to implement safety measures, closing beaches and advising fishermen to stay out of the water until the sharks moved on. As the summer wore on, the sharks remained a persistent threat, their presence a stark reminder of the delicate balance between humans and the natural world. The heat wave eventually subsided, and the bull sharks began to retreat, returning to deeper waters. The marine research vessel Oceanic Dawn rocked gently in the warm waters off the Bahamas. It was May 3, 2018, and the research team had been at sea for over a week, studying the migration patterns of hammerhead sharks. This part of the Bahamas, near the fictional island of Clearwater Cay, was a well-known hotspot for the elusive creatures. Hammerheads, with their unique wide-set eyes and flat hammer-shaped heads, were fascinating to marine biologists due to their mysterious behavior and wide-ranging migrations. Dr. Lydia Foster, the lead researcher, had dedicated much of her career to understanding these predators, and was eager to collect data better to protect them from threats like overfishing and habitat loss. That day had started like any other. The team had prepared their equipment early, setting up their sonar arrays and tagging devices. Dr. Foster worked alongside her assistants, Rachel Moreno and Marcus Hale, as they coordinated the drones that would track the sharks' movements. The day had been productive, with a few hammerheads already tagged and swimming off into the deep blue. Morale was high as the team monitored the live feeds, watching the graceful predators glide through the water below. But as the afternoon wore on, something changed. The team's equipment began to pick up erratic movements from one of the sharks. One hammerhead in particular, much larger than the others they had encountered, had started circling the boat, staying closer than usual. Hammerheads were curious creatures, often inspecting boats and divers with their keen senses. But this one seemed different. Its movements were sharper and more aggressive, as if it were marking the vessel as an intruder in its territory. Dr. Foster adjusted the drone cameras to get a better look at the shark. It was huge, easily over 13 feet long, its wide hammerhead unmistakable on the screen. The shark was moving with an intensity that made the team uneasy. Marcus noted that it had circled the boat at least 6 times in the last half hour. which was unusual for hammerheads, who typically passed by quickly and moved on. Then, without warning, the shark made its first strike. The boat jolted violently as the hammerhead rammed into the side with incredible force. The team was thrown off balance, scrambling to stabilize themselves as the boat rocked in the water. Rachel grabbed onto a railing, her heart racing as she tried to steady her breathing. Marcus rushed to check the equipment, fearing the impact might have damaged their delicate sonar arrays. Dr. Foster watched the water, her mind racing to understand the shark's behavior. The hammerhead returned, this time ramming directly into the drone cage that had been lowered into the water. The impact was hard enough to knock the cage sideways, tangling the cables that connected it to the boat. The shark thrashed violently, its tail slamming against the side of the vessel. It wasn't just curious anymore, it was angry. The research team had encountered aggressive sharks before, but this level of hostility was rare for hammerheads, which were generally more cautious around humans. Dr. Foster knew they had to act quickly. If the shark continued its attack, it could cause serious damage to the boat and the equipment, not to mention putting the team's lives at risk. She instructed Rachel and Marcus to reel in the drone cage, but the cables were stuck, tangled in the shark's relentless movements. The team worked together, struggling against the tension on the lines as the shark rammed the boat again, harder this time. The force was so strong that part of the boat's railing bent inward. Marcus, closest to the edge, nearly lost his footing as the shark slammed into the boat once more. He steadied himself just in time, narrowly avoiding being thrown into the water. His mind raced with the thought of what might happen if he ended up overboard with the aggressive predator circling below. He tightened his grip on the cable, his muscles straining as he helped Rachel pull the cage back up. The shark's attacks intensified. It circled the boat again, this time closer, its wide, flat head grazing the hull as it moved with frightening speed. The team worked frantically to untangle the cables, but the shark wasn't giving them any time. It struck again, hitting the boat with such force that water splashed over the sides, drenching the deck. Dr. Foster could feel the tension rising. The shark wasn't acting like a typical hammerhead. It was defending its territory, and they were right in the middle of it. At that moment, Dr. Foster made a quick decision. She instructed Marcus to activate a sonar pulse designed to disrupt shark sensory systems in emergencies. It was a non-lethal deterrent, but powerful enough to disorient the shark and hopefully drive it away. Marcus hesitated for a second, then hit the switch. The pulse emitted a high-frequency sound that traveled through the water, designed to confuse the shark's electroreception. The hammerhead reacted almost immediately. It thrashed in the water, circling wildly before darting off into the depths. The boat stilled, and for a few moments the team was left standing in silence, hearts pounding in their chests. They watched the water carefully, waiting to see if the shark would return. But the danger seemed to have passed. Slowly, they began to relax, their bodies still tense from the encounter. The damage to the boat was significant, with bent railings and damaged equipment, but the team was unharmed. Dr. Foster, though shaken, was already thinking ahead. The incident had been a reminder of the unpredictable nature of fieldwork in shark-inhabited waters. The sharks they studied were powerful and territorial, and the ocean was their domain. Respecting that balance was crucial not only for their safety, but also for the success of their research. As the sun began to set, the oceanic dawn headed back to Clearwater Cay. The team remained quiet, reflecting on the close call they had just experienced. Dr. Foster knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she also understood that these moments were part of the work. The hammerheads were not the enemy. They were creatures with their own needs and instincts. The remote waters off the coast of the Aleutian Islands, Alaska, had always been known for their isolation and unpredictable dangers. On September 12, 2010, the crew of the Northern Wind, a commercial fishing vessel, set out for another week-long expedition. Captain Finn Harrison, a weathered fisherman in his mid-40s, had been navigating these treacherous waters for years. His crew joined him: Nick Wheeler, a strong and steady deckhand in his 30s, and Joel Perez, a young, eager fisherman with just a few years of experience under his belt. They were miles away from any land, fishing in the frigid, deep waters known to yield valuable catches like halibut and cod. The day had started normally enough. The crew worked in unison, hauling in their nets filled with fish, The deck of the Northern Wind slick with seawater and the smell of fresh catch. The weather had been holding steady, though a cold wind was beginning to pick up, a sign that rougher conditions were likely ahead. Captain Harrison kept his eye on the horizon, watching the skies darken, but he was used to the unpredictability of the Alaskan waters. By midday, the crew had collected a large haul, filling the ship's hold with enough fish to make the trip worthwhile. Joel, standing at the stern, threw another line into the water while Nick secured the latest batch of fish. As the boat rocked with the waves, none of them noticed the shadow moving beneath the surface. That shadow belonged to a dusky shark. Dusky sharks were not common in these waters, but with the warming seas caused by melting polar ice, their migration patterns had started to shift. Typically found in warmer regions, this predator had been drawn north by changes in the environment, bringing it closer to human activity, and now it had picked up on the scent of the fish bleeding into the water from the northern wind. Suddenly the boat lurched. A loud thud echoed from the hull, sending Nick stumbling backward. Joel, who was still holding the line, felt an intense tug far stronger than any fish could manage. He barely had time to react before the line snapped, whipping past his face. The crew's attention quickly shifted to the water, where a large fin sliced through the surface. The dusky shark, agitated by the presence of the boat and its catch, charged the vessel again. It struck with immense force, shaking the entire boat. The impact sent a chill through the crew as they realized the shark wasn't just curious, it was attacking. Captain Harrison rushed to the controls, trying to maneuver the boat away, but the shark continued its assault, ramming the hull repeatedly. The blows were strong enough to knock loose some of the equipment secured on deck. Panic set in as the crew scrambled to assess the damage. The shark, persistent and aggressive, circled back, charging once more. This time it targeted the fishing nets still hanging off the side of the boat. Its sharp teeth tore into the nets, ripping through the lines as it tried to reach the fish trapped within. The violent thrashing caused several of the fish to spill back into the water, but it did nothing to deter the shark. Joel, trying to secure the remaining gear, was thrown off balance as the shark's powerful body collided with the side of the boat. He fell hard onto the deck, his hands scraped and bleeding. Nick rushed over to help him up, his heart racing as the shark continued its assault. Captain Harrison, seeing the growing danger, ordered them to cut the remaining lines and retreat. With the shark circling dangerously close, Nick and Joel grabbed their knives and cut the last of the nets free. But the damage had been done. The shark, still hungry and agitated, wasn't letting up. It breached the water, its massive body half emerging as it slammed back down, sending another wave of force through the boat. Captain Harrison knew they couldn't stay here. The boat had already taken too much damage, and the worsening weather was now closing in fast. The crew worked quickly to secure what was left of their gear, but just as they were about to pull away, the shark struck again, this time biting down on one of the steel cables attached to the fishing gear. The force of the bite caused the cable to snap, whipping across the deck and narrowly missing Nick's head. He ducked just in time, his heart pounding in his chest. Captain Harrison managed to get the engines running at full speed, steering the boat away from the shark. The vessel powered through the waves as the predator, finally deterred by the distance and the lack of fish, began to fade into the depths. But the damage was done. The crew, shaken and bruised, gathered on deck, taking stock of what had just happened. As the northern wind made its way back toward safer waters, Captain Harrison couldn't shake the implications of the encounter. The dusky shark wasn't supposed to be here, this far north, this aggressive. It was a sign of the changing climate, the melting polar ice driving predators like this into new territories. The isolation of their work had always been dangerous, but now, with the shifting behavior of marine predators, it felt even more uncertain. The crew had survived the attack, but it served as a harsh reminder of the unpredictable power of nature. The waters they fished were changing, and so were the creatures within them. As the northern wind limped back to port, Captain Harrison knew that future expeditions would carry even greater risks, as the balance between man and the ocean continued to shift in ways no one could predict. The icy waters of the Norwegian fjord stretched out in every direction, vast and silent beneath a thin layer of ice. Marine biologist Lars Pedersen had been preparing for this dive for months. He had long been fascinated by the Greenland shark, a deep-sea predator that thrived in these cold, dark waters. The sharks were massive and slow-moving, often living for centuries. Yet little was known about their behavior. Lars had come to study them up close, hoping to capture footage and document one of the ocean's most mysterious creatures. On March 12, 2015, Lars stood at the edge of a hole cut into the ice, preparing to descend into the depths. The day had begun smoothly. Lars had checked his equipment, ensuring his oxygen supply and camera gear were functioning. The temperature was brutally cold, but it was perfect for his research. His goal was to dive deep, observe and record the Greenland shark in its natural environment, far beneath the frozen surface of the Norwegian fjord. The water was freezing as he plunged in, but Lars felt the familiar calm wash over him. The deep blue surrounded him as he descended, his lights cutting through the darkness. He moved slowly, conserving energy and scanning the water for signs of life. After a few minutes, his eyes caught movement below. There it was, a Greenland shark gliding effortlessly in the distance. The shark was massive, its body ancient and covered in scars. Lars hovered silently, watching in awe. Unlike other sharks, Greenland sharks were slow, patient hunters, and Lars had never heard of one attacking a human. He felt safe enough to approach, moving closer with his camera to capture the rare footage. Lars observed the creature for nearly an hour, his body steady as he filmed its slow, deliberate movements. The shark paid him little attention, continuing its quiet patrol of the deep fjord. Lars was thrilled. Everything was going according to plan. Suddenly, his oxygen supply gauge began to flicker. At first, he thought it was a minor glitch, but the readings quickly became erratic. His equipment malfunctioned, and Lars knew he had to ascend quickly before his oxygen ran out. The calm of the dive evaporated, replaced by urgency. He needed to surface, but he had to be careful not to rise too fast or risk decompression sickness. With each kick upward, the water around him churned, creating small disturbances in the previously calm environment. Once indifferent to his presence, the Greenland shark turned its massive head toward Lars. It began to follow, its movements quicker now, responding to the sudden activity. Lars realized with growing fear that the normally slow shark was speeding up, its instincts triggered by his rapid ascent. Lars felt the first wave of panic as he ascended, his heart pounding in his chest. The Greenland shark, once a peaceful shadow in the deep, was now following him, drawn by the disturbance he had created in the water. The shark was moving faster than he had thought possible, closing the distance between them. Lars pushed himself to swim harder, but he could feel the weight of the freezing water and the pressure of the ice above. He had ascended too quickly, and now the shark was locked onto him. Its large, pale eyes focused on his every move. Lars could see the scars along its body, marks of battles fought in the cold depths. The predator's ancient instincts were fully awake now, and Lars realized he was no longer an observer, but a target. As he neared the surface, the reality of his situation hit him harder. The sheet of ice above his head stretched endlessly in all directions, save for the small hole where he had entered. His only escape was that narrow opening, but he had drifted too far from it during his dive. He was trapped beneath the ice with only moments to return to safety. The air in his tank was running low and every second counted. Lars turned sharply, his eyes scanning for the hole in the ice. He kicked as hard as he could, his legs burning from the cold and the effort. But the shark was still there, close behind. It moved with purpose, its massive body cutting through the water effortlessly. Lars's chest tightened as the fear took over. He knew he had to conserve his energy, but the predator's proximity made it impossible to stay calm. The shark surged forward, its head inches from Lars's legs, and he could feel the displacement of water from its movements. He swung his camera equipment desperately, trying to create enough barrier to keep the shark at bay. The shark recoiled slightly, its eyes fixed on the struggling diver. But it wasn't deterred. It was patient, circling Lars in the freezing water, waiting for the right moment. Lars's oxygen was almost gone. His hands trembled as he kicked upward again, his lungs burning from the lack of air. The opening in the ice was still several meters away, but it felt impossibly far. He glanced back to see the shark close in again, its enormous mouth opening slightly as it neared. In a moment of sheer survival instinct, Lars used his camera to shove the shark's snout. startling it just enough to gain a few precious feet of distance. Finally, through the blur of fear and exhaustion, Lars saw the faint light of the hole in the ice. Summoning every ounce of strength left in his body, he propelled himself toward it, his vision dimming as his oxygen supply dwindled. The shark made one last lunge, but Lars reached the surface, bursting through the hole in the ice with a gasp of air. He scrambled onto the frozen surface, shaking uncontrollably from the cold and the terror. Below him, the Greenland shark continued to circle for a moment before slowly drifting back into the depths. Lars lay there, breathing heavily, his mind reeling from the close call. He had faced one of the ocean's oldest predators and survived, but the image of the shark's cold eyes and relentless pursuit would stay with him forever. 2024, a U.S. Coast Guard vessel patrolled the rough waters off the Pacific coast near Monterey, California. The crew was engaged in a critical search and rescue mission, responding to distress signals from a small fishing boat stranded in the dangerous currents. The Pacific Ocean around Monterey was known for its unpredictable weather and strong waves, but it was also famous for something else: great white sharks. The Coast Guard was no stranger to the perils of the ocean, but what they were about to face was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The crew aboard the USCGC Vigilant, a sturdy cutter designed for missions like these, was focused on reaching the stranded sailors. The ocean was choppy, with waves crashing against the ship's hull as the crew worked efficiently to track the boat's last known location. The thick fog made visibility poor, and time was running out for the people they were trying to save. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes, a seasoned Coast Guard veteran with over 15 years of experience, led the operation. He had seen his fair share of dangerous rescues, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. The crew knew the risks of working in these waters, but focused on saving lives. Suddenly, without warning, the ship rocked violently. The crew, startled, scrambled to maintain their balance. It felt as though something had struck the vessel from below. Reyes, steadying himself, quickly ordered his team to investigate. At first, they thought it could have been a large wave or a submerged object, but the impact was too strong and direct. Moments later, the ship jolted again, even harder this time. The sound of something massive slamming into the hull echoed through the deck. The crew rushed to the ship's side, peering over the edge into the dark, turbulent water. Then they saw a large, great white shark circling the vessel. Its massive dorsal fin sliced through the water, and it didn't take long for the crew to realize that the shark was acting in a highly unusual and aggressive manner. The great white rammed the ship again with a force that shook the entire cutter. The crew could see the shark's enormous body just beneath the surface, its movements fast and deliberate. Great white sharks were common in these waters, but this aggression was rare. It wasn't acting like a typical predator. It was almost as if the shark was attacking the ship itself. Reyes quickly gathered his team, issuing orders to ensure the safety of everyone on board. The Coast Guard was trained to handle various emergencies, but dealing with an aggressive shark of this size was uncharted territory. The ship had weathered strong storms and high seas, but the repeated hits from the shark were pushing the limits of the vessel's durability. As the shark continued its assault, the crew remained focused on their primary mission, rescuing the stranded sailors. But now they faced a dual threat: saving lives while fending off a powerful predator of the deep. The great white shark continued its relentless assault on the USCGC Vigilant, slamming its powerful body into the hull with shocking force. Each hit shook the ship, causing the crew to grip whatever they could to stay upright. The crew watched anxiously as the massive predator circled the boat, its dark silhouette visible just beneath the surface of the churning water. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes knew they had to act fast. The shark's behavior was unlike anything they had ever seen, and it wasn't backing down. The crew, trained for high-stress situations, stayed focused. Reyes ordered them to remain calm as they searched the stranded sailors while keeping an eye on the shark. As the great white made another pass at the ship, one of the crew members shouted that they had spotted the fishing boat, barely visible through the thick fog and rough waves. The ship was about half a mile away, and its small size made it vulnerable to the harsh conditions of the Pacific. Reyes knew they had to move quickly. The stranded sailors were their priority, but the unpredictable shark posed a serious threat. The ship could withstand only so much damage before it became compromised. The crew carefully navigated the cutter toward the fishing boat while the shark continued to ram the hull. Just as they neared the fishing boat, the shark struck again, hitting the stern with an alarming amount of force. The impact threw several crew members off balance, and Reyes realized that time was running out. He instructed the team to launch the rescue boat immediately. With the shark so close, it was a risk, but they had no choice. The small rescue boat was lowered into the water, and 2 crew members, fully aware of the lurking predator, set off toward the stranded sailors. The rough ocean waves made it difficult to steer, but the crew reached the distressed boat. The sailors, cold and terrified, were pulled aboard the rescue boat just as the great white shark appeared again, this time ramming the cutter with another bone-jarring hit. The shark focused on the smaller craft as the rescue boat sped back toward the cutter. The crew worked quickly, pulling the sailors aboard the cutter while keeping an eye on the shark, which was now circling closer. The crew acted fast, hoisting the rescue boat back onto the cutter as the shark made one last pass. The shark slammed into the side of the cutter again, but this time it seemed to lose interest, finally disappearing into the depths of the Pacific. With the sailors safely aboard and the shark no longer in sight, the crew breathed a sigh of relief. The cutter, though battered, was still functional. The stranded sailors were grateful to be rescued, but the ordeal had shaken everyone. The shark's aggressive behavior was still a mystery, and Reyes couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was happening beneath the ocean's surface. In the days that followed, marine experts were brought in to investigate the unusual behavior of the great white shark. Environmental factors, including changing ocean temperatures and declining prey due to overfishing, were believed to be key triggers. The incident became a sobering reminder of the delicate balance between humans and the natural world. For the crew of the USCG Vigilant, it was an encounter they would never forget, a high-stakes rescue complicated by the raw power of one of nature's most feared predators. On September 3, 2024, a team of oceanographers aboard the research vessel Ocean Explorer was stationed deep in the Atlantic Ocean, hundreds of miles off the coast of Florida. The team was conducting a groundbreaking study on shark migration patterns, a project they had spent years preparing for. The group comprised experts from various fields led by Dr. Elena Martinez, a renowned marine biologist. Dr. Martinez had dedicated her life to studying sharks, and this mission was one of the most important of her career. The team also included Dr. Samir Patel, a marine ecologist specializing in ocean currents, and Dr. Lily Zhang, an expert in underwater tracking technology. Their research aimed to uncover new details about the migratory routes of mako sharks, one of the ocean's fastest and most elusive predators. For weeks, the team had been tracking several tagged sharks using advanced equipment to collect data from the ocean's depths. The project went smoothly, and the team was optimistic about their findings. They were anchored in a part of the ocean known for its deep waters and diverse marine life, an ideal location for their study. However, as the day progressed, the mood aboard the ship began to shift. The team had deployed bait and tracking devices earlier in the day, hoping to attract more sharks to tag and study. They hadn't anticipated the sheer number of mako sharks that would soon be surrounding their vessel. At first, the crew noticed a few sharks circling the ship, drawn by the scent of the bait in the water. This was not unusual, and the team continued their work, monitoring the movements of the tagged sharks from the safety of the ship's deck. But as the hours passed, the number of sharks began to increase. More and more mako sharks appeared, their sleek bodies cutting through the water with alarming speed. They circled the vessel in a tight formation, their dorsal fins slicing the surface. Dr. Martinez watched from the deck, her expression turning from curiosity to concern. The sharks were no longer behaving like typical makos. These sharks were agitated, their movements fast and aggressive. It wasn't long before the first shark rammed into the ship's side, sending a shudder through the vessel. The team, initially focused on their research, quickly realized that they were facing a serious situation. The pod of mako sharks, now numbering at least a dozen, had become more aggressive. The crew could hear the sharks ramming the hull with increasing force, each impact sending vibrations through the ship. The bait had drawn in the sharks, but now they were becoming territorial, viewing the vessel as a threat. As the sharks continued to circle, their speed and aggression intensified. While monitoring the underwater tracking devices, Dr. Patel noticed that several sharks were swimming dangerously close to the equipment they had deployed. If the sharks damaged the equipment, weeks of research could be lost. The team needed a plan, and they needed it fast. The pod of mako sharks circled relentlessly, their sleek bodies cutting through the water with unnerving speed. The crew aboard the Ocean Explorer felt the ship shake with each impact as the sharks continued to ram the hull. Watching from the deck, Dr. Elena Martinez knew they had to act quickly. The situation grew more dangerous by the minute, and the sharks showed no signs of backing down. The team had to find a way to protect themselves and their equipment without harming the animals they had come to study. Working with the ship's tracking devices, Dr. Lily Jiang pointed out that the sharks were becoming more aggressive around the underwater equipment. If they damaged the sensitive instruments, months of research would be lost. The team had invested significant resources into tracking the sharks' migration patterns, and losing this data would set them back significantly. Realizing the situation's urgency, Dr. Samir Patel suggested they temporarily shut down the equipment to reduce the noise and vibrations that might further agitate the sharks. The team quickly moved to power down the devices, hoping it would calm the animals circling the ship. The strategy worked, if only briefly. The sharks slowed their movements but continued to circle, staying close to the vessel. Dr. Martinez, determined to keep the sharks from doing more damage, instructed the team to deploy a secondary tactic. They released some remaining bait farther from the ship, trying to lure the sharks away. The bait drifted with the current, and slowly a few sharks broke away from the pod, chasing the scent into the open water. It was a small victory, but most of the sharks remained near the vessel, their territorial behavior keeping them close. Suddenly, another strong hit rattled the ship, causing the crew to stumble. One of the sharks had struck the hull with more force than before, sending ripples through the water. Dr. Martinez knew they couldn't keep playing defense. They needed to move the vessel to safer waters. She ordered the crew to begin lifting the anchor, preparing to navigate away from the aggressive pod. The crew worked quickly, pulling up the anchor and securing the equipment on deck. As the ship's engines roared to life, the team began steering the vessel away from the sharks. Slowly, they gained distance, watching as the mako sharks finally started to fall behind. After what felt like hours, the last of the sharks disappeared into the deep blue, leaving the Ocean Explorer in calmer waters. After the encounter, the crew was shaken but relieved. The ship sustained minor damage, but the team and equipment were safe. The experience highlighted the unpredictability of working with wild animals in their natural habitat. Though they had come to study the sharks, the crew was reminded of the powerful and untamed nature of the ocean's predators. Back on shore, the team reviewed the data they had collected. The sudden aggression of the mako sharks sparked questions about changing ocean conditions. Climate change, overfishing, and other environmental factors likely contributed to unusual shark behavior. The incident became a pivotal moment for the team, influencing future research and emphasizing the urgent need to understand how environmental changes affected marine life. For Dr. Martinez and her crew, the encounter reminded them that even with the best technology and preparation, the ocean remains a place of raw power and danger. It was a lesson in respect for the creatures they studied, and a reminder of the delicate balance between scientific discovery and the natural world. On April 10, 2024, in a small town along the banks of the Paraná River in Argentina, the community began to notice troubling changes in the water. The river, which had long been a source of livelihood and recreation for the locals, was swelling due to rising water levels. Unusual weather patterns driven by climate change have altered the ecosystem. Fishermen like Javier Morales, a lifelong resident, had started seeing signs that something was wrong. The fish behaved differently and the currents seemed stronger, but the most disturbing change was the presence of bull sharks far upstream, closer to the town than ever before. Javier, 50 years old and the father of two, had spent his entire life fishing on the Paraná River. He had seen the river change, but this was different. Bull sharks, normally confined to the brackish waters near the river's mouth where it met the sea, were now venturing deep into freshwater. Several fishermen reported sightings recently, but few believed the sharks posed a real threat. That changed when the first attack happened. Javier was out on the water that morning, casting his nets with his son Mateo. a 20-year-old recently joining the family's fishing business. The river was calm and the sun had just begun to rise, casting a warm glow on the water. They were working as they always had, unaware of the danger lurking below. Suddenly, there was a violent splash near their boat. Matteo leaned over the edge, curious to see what had caused the disturbance. Without warning, a large bull shark surged out of the water, its powerful body hitting the side of the boat with a force that knocked Matteo off balance. He fell into the water, and the shark was on him within seconds. Javier, horrified, watched as the shark clamped down on his son's leg. The water turned red as Matteo struggled to free himself. Acting quickly, Javier grabbed a long oar and struck the shark, trying to fend it off. After what felt like an eternity, the shark released its grip and swam away, leaving Matteo badly injured but alive. Javier hauled his son back into the boat, his heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. They rushed back to shore, where Matteo was treated at the local clinic. His leg was severely damaged, but he had survived. The attack sent shockwaves through the town, where news of bull sharks so far upriver was unheard of. Fear spread among the residents, especially those who relied on the river for their livelihoods. In the days that followed, more reports of shark sightings and attacks began to surface. Swimmers, fishermen, and even people bathing along the riverbank were at risk. The once peaceful river had become dangerous, and the town's leaders knew they had to act quickly. The mayor called an emergency meeting, bringing together local officials, fishermen, and environmentalists to find a solution. The community faced an unprecedented threat, and the rising waters had bolstered the bull sharks. As the town grappled with the danger in the river, the cause became clear. Climate change had disrupted the natural flow of the piranha, pushing bull sharks further upstream in search of food. The already fragile ecosystem was being thrown off balance. The river that had sustained the town for generations became a source of fear. As the town reeled from the recent attacks, Javier and his family were not alone in their fear. The river, once a lifeline, had turned into a source of danger for everyone. Fishermen stopped going out as frequently, and children were no longer allowed to play near the water. The community was gripped by the knowledge that the bull sharks, drawn by the changing environment, were still out there, lurking beneath the surface. Local authorities and environmental experts began studying the situation more closely. They set out to understand why the sharks had moved so far upstream and how to address the growing threat. They soon found that the answer lay in the dramatic changes to the river itself. Rising water levels, increased rainfall, and disrupted ecosystems had created the perfect conditions for the sharks to venture far beyond their usual range. The sharks, aggressive and territorial by nature, saw the influx of fish as an opportunity, and their new hunting grounds extended deep into the human-inhabited areas. Javier, still shaken by his son's near-death experience, was called to a town meeting where he shared what had happened that day on the water. The community listened intently as experts explained that the sharks were not likely to leave anytime soon. They warned that bull sharks could become permanent in the area if the climate and water conditions remained unstable. The town was at a crossroads. It must find ways to coexist with the predators, or risk abandoning its long-held way of life. Several temporary measures were implemented. The town installed warning signs on the riverbank advising against swimming or wading. Fishermen were given special equipment, including protective cages, to keep them safe while working. Additionally, environmentalists began monitoring the sharks' movements, hoping to track their behavior and find patterns that could help predict future attacks. Despite these efforts, fear remained. Like many other fishermen, Javier questioned whether it was safe to continue his trade. The river had supported his family for generations, but now, every trip out on the water carried the risk of another attack. Matteo's recovery was slow, and the sight of his son's injury haunted him. The river had changed, and so had their relationship with it. Months passed, and while the number of shark encounters decreased, the community knew the problem wasn't going away. Environmentalists continued their research, and with time, they started seeing a larger trend. Climate change was forcing more marine predators into human spaces. The bull sharks were only one example of how disrupted ecosystems affected wildlife and people. The aftermath of the bull shark invasion left the town transformed. While life continued, the river was no longer viewed with the same sense of trust. Once proud of his connection to the water, Javier cautiously approached it. Like many others, his family had to adjust to the new reality. The experience reminded them how fragile the balance between humans and nature could be, especially in a changing world. Sharks are often misunderstood as creatures that randomly attack humans. But what many don't realize is how specific triggers can lead to these terrifying encounters. Species like the bull shark are known for their adaptability to salt and fresh water, increasing their reach into areas humans frequent. Meanwhile, the tiger shark's opportunistic nature makes it one of the most aggressive predators, attacking anything in its path. Smaller sharks, like the reef shark, can be deadly when threatened. These 6 harrowing encounters show just how dangerous these misunderstood predators can be. The Gold Coast in Australia, known for its beautiful beaches and calm waters, was the perfect place for the McAllister family to celebrate their youngest son's birthday. It was January 17, 1995, a bright summer day, and the family had been looking forward to this day for months. The McAllisters, James, 42, his wife Sarah, 39, and their 3 children, Liam, 16, Megan, 14, and Oliver, who had just turned 9, had rented a small boat for the occasion. They planned to spend the day on the water, swimming, fishing, and relaxing. They had done this before, and the waters of the Gold Coast had always been a source of happiness and tranquility. The boat was small but perfect for a family outing. It had a small cabin and plenty of space to store their fishing gear and picnic supplies. The day had been filled with laughter as they sailed a few miles offshore, still within sight of the coast. Oliver, excited for his birthday, had caught his first fish, and the family had spent hours enjoying the sun and sea breeze. By mid-afternoon, they anchored the boat in a seemingly calm, shallow area to swim quickly before heading back to shore. The waters around Australia, particularly the Gold Coast, were known for great white sharks. These massive predators could reach up to 20 feet in length and were apex hunters, capable of sensing the slightest movement in the water from miles away. While attacks were rare, locals knew the risks, but the McAllisters, like many tourists, weren't overly concerned. The sun was bright, the sea was clear, and the water looked inviting. James had checked the depth and felt confident they were in safe territory. The family gathered on the deck, their voices rising excitedly as they prepared for one last swim before heading home. Liam and Megan were the first to dive into the water, splashing each other and laughing as Oliver waited for his dad to help him into the water. Watching from the boat, Sarah smiled at her children, content in the day's joy. Unbeknownst to them, far below the surface, a great white shark was prowling the waters, drawn by the vibrations of the family's playful splashing. It had been hunting along the coast, and now, sensing potential prey, it moved swiftly, its powerful body cutting through the depths. The shark was massive, nearly 18 feet long, with rows of razor-sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. It had detected the family from a distance and was now closing in. Without warning, the water around Liam suddenly erupted. One moment he was laughing with his sister. The next he was yanked beneath the surface. A flash of silver and white moved through the water and a scream pierced the air. Megan, just a few feet away, froze in horror as the dark shape of the great white shark became clear. James leaped into the water, frantically swimming toward Liam, who had surfaced briefly, blood streaming from a deep wound in his leg. But before James could reach him, the shark struck again, its massive jaws clamping down on Liam's torso, pulling him under. The water turned red as the shark thrashed violently, shaking its prey with incredible force. Panic swept over the family. Sarah screamed from the boat, trying to grab Oliver, who had been about to jump into the water, while Megan swam back toward the ship in terror, desperately trying to escape the carnage unfolding around her. But the shark wasn't finished. It turned toward Megan in a flash, its black eyes locking onto her. Before she could pull herself back onto the boat, the shark lunged, its powerful jaws catching her by the waist. Megan let out a scream, her hand slipping from the boat's edge as the shark dragged her into the depths. The water around her churned violently, and her small body was no match for the predator's strength. Blood filled the water once again as James tried to reach his daughter. But it was too late. Sarah clung to Oliver, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. His birthday joy turned into unimaginable horror. She watched helplessly as her husband, desperate to save his children, swam toward the chaos. But the shark was relentless. It came back for James, its speed and power overwhelming. With a single, brutal strike, it grabbed him by the legs, pulling him under just as it had done to Liam. The water frothed as the shark twisted and tore at James, his struggles weakening until they stopped. Now only Sarah and Oliver remained. The boat rocked as the shark circled, its dorsal fins slicing through the water, searching for its next target. Sarah knew they had to escape the water, but she was afraid. Her heart raced as she held onto her son, praying for a miracle. But the shark wasn't done. In one final, devastating attack, the shark rammed the side of the boat, knocking Sarah and Oliver into the water. The force of the impact left them disoriented, and the shark struck before Sarah could regain her bearings. Its jaws closed around her midsection, pulling her down with brutal force. Now floating helplessly nearby, Oliver screamed for his mother, but the shark quickly turned its attention to him. In an instant, it dragged him under, his small body disappearing beneath the bloodied sea. The Coast Guard, alerted by another nearby boat that had witnessed part of the attack, arrived minutes later. But by the time they reached the scene, the water was still. Only bits of debris and a red stain on the water remained as a silent testament to the unfolding carnage. They could do nothing when the Coast Guard pulled up to the wreckage. The shark had vanished, and the McAllisters were gone, devoured by the ocean's most fearsome predator. Only a few boat pieces remained, drifting aimlessly in the blood-streaked waters. The Gold Coast community was shocked and struggled to comprehend the tragedy. It was a reminder of the untamed power of the sea, where even a day of celebration could turn into a nightmare in a matter of moments. It was June 7, 1996, a day that had started with bright skies and calm seas off the Bahamas coast. It was supposed to be a routine trip for Robert Darnell and his crew. Robert, 46, an experienced sailor, had set out with his brother Daniel and their two friends, Jack Monroe and Steve Callahan, on a week-long sailing adventure. They had planned to explore the remote islands in the Caribbean, taking in the beauty of the ocean. Their boat, the Sun Chaser, had been sturdy enough for the journey, or so they thought. The first few days went smoothly, the men bonding over shared stories, fishing, and enjoying the calm, open waters. They had been friends for years, often taking trips like this together to escape their daily routines. The boat had all the needed supplies, and they felt confident navigating through these waters. But the weather turned without warning. A sudden violent storm hit them late afternoon, far from any coastline. Dark clouds gathered quickly, the wind howled, and the waves grew large, brutally crashing against the boat. The crew scrambled to control the sails, but the storm was relentless. The Sun Chaser was tossed around like a toy in the angry sea, and within hours their worst fear came true. The boat capsized. Water poured into the cabin, and the men barely had time to grab a life raft and some emergency supplies before the boat sank beneath the surface. The storm raged on, but they had no choice but to climb into the small inflatable raft and hold on. Their boat was gone, leaving them adrift in the open ocean, and they did not know how long it would be until they were rescued. The sea calmed as the storm finally passed, but they faced a new challenge. They were stranded miles from shore, with no food or water except for a small amount in their emergency kit. The scorching sun beat down on them, and dehydration set in quickly. The vastness of the ocean around them was both beautiful and terrifying. No sign of land or any ships could come to their rescue. For the first day, they remained hopeful. They rationed their water, keeping their spirits up as best they could. But as the hours dragged on, the reality of their situation became clear. They were alone, floating in the endless blue, and their chances of survival grew slimmer with each passing moment. Then, on the second day, they noticed the fins. Oceanic white-tip sharks, known for their curiosity and aggressiveness, were common in these waters. Unlike many sharks, which typically avoid humans, the oceanic white-tip was known to be bold, especially when hungry. These sharks were opportunistic predators, and shipwreck survivors had often reported encounters with them. For Robert and his crew, the sight of the fins cutting through the water sent a chill through their already exhausted bodies. At first, the sharks simply circled the raft from a distance, watching the men with dark, unblinking eyes. There were 3 of them, their large bodies gliding effortlessly through the water. The sailors tried to remain calm, knowing that panicking would only worsen things. But as the hours passed, the sharks grew bolder, swimming closer to the raft, their fins cutting through the water rapidly. By the third day, the sharks were no longer just circling. They began bumping the raft, testing its strength, their powerful bodies pushing against the small inflatable craft. Robert and the others could feel the impacts each time a shark made contact, their hearts pounding as they realized how fragile their situation had become. The sharks were hungry, and their patience was wearing thin. The men tried to scare the sharks away by banging on the raft's sides with their makeshift paddles, but the predators were relentless. The smell of the men, weak and sweating under the heat, had drawn them in, and the sharks wouldn't leave without a fight. The crew knew they had to act fast. They fashioned crude weapons out of pieces of metal they had managed to salvage from the boat's wreckage, sharpening the ends as best they could. The first attack came just after noon. One of the sharks, larger than the others, launched at the raft, its powerful jaws clamping down on the side. The men screamed in horror as the shark's teeth tore into the rubber, puncturing the raft and sending water splashing into the boat. Robert grabbed one of their makeshift weapons and stabbed at the shark's head, striking it several times before it let go. Blood filled the water, but it wasn't enough to kill the shark, only to anger it. The shark thrashed wildly in the water, and the other two sharks began circling faster, sensing the chaos. Jack was the next to strike, jabbing at one of the approaching sharks as it came too close, its fin brushing against the side of the raft. The men were exhausted, their arms heavy, but adrenaline kept them going. They fought with everything they had, knowing one more breach could sink them, but the sharks were relentless. As the sun began to set, the men knew they couldn't keep this up much longer. Their raft was slowly taking on water, and the sharks showed no signs of retreating. Desperation set in as they realized that night was falling, and their chances of survival would be even lower in the dark. Suddenly, one of the sharks lunged again, aiming for Steve, who had been leaning too far over the raft's edge. The shark's massive jaws clamped down on his leg, terrifyingly pulling him into the water. Steve screamed, thrashing in the water as the shark tore into him, his blood mixing with the ocean as the other sharks moved in for the kill. Robert and Daniel tried to pull him back into the raft, but it was too late. The sharks were too fast, too strong. Steve's body disappeared beneath the surface, and the water around them turned red. The remaining three men watched in horror, their minds barely able to process what had just happened. The sharks continued to circle, but now the men knew they were next. The ocean had become a battleground, and they were losing. They fought off the sharks as best they could, but exhaustion and fear had taken their toll. With night approaching, they knew they wouldn't last much longer. When the Coast Guard finally found them, the raft was barely afloat. Robert, Daniel, and Jack were pulled from the water, weak and delirious, their bodies covered in wounds from the sharks' relentless attacks. Steve was never found. The ocean had claimed him, and the sharks had left only a bloody memory behind. The sailors would live to tell their story, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain with them forever. The ocean, once their playground, had turned into a nightmare, and the sight of a fin cutting through the water would haunt them for the rest of their lives. It was July 22, 2005, and the waters off the coast of Nassau, Bahamas, sparkled under the late morning sun. A group of eager tourists had signed up for a snorkeling trip, one of the highlights of any visit to the Bahamas, and the day had started perfectly. The tour group, led by two local guides, set out from a small marina on a Coral Dream boat bound for a popular snorkeling spot, known for its crystal-clear waters and abundant marine life. Among the tourists was 29-year-old David Carson, who was visiting from the U.S. with his fiancée, Emma Ward, to celebrate their engagement. It was supposed to be a day filled with beautiful memories. David was particularly excited. He had always been fascinated by the ocean, and the Bahamas was the perfect place to see some of its beauty up close. The couple had been looking forward to this trip for months, and everything about the day felt right. The guides had briefed the group on snorkeling safety, instructing them to stay together and avoid wandering too far from the boat. Bull sharks were known to frequent these waters, and while the chances of an attack were low, the guides emphasized the importance of sticking to the group. Bull sharks, notorious for their aggressive nature and ability to thrive in salt and fresh water, were often spotted around the Bahamas. Unlike other sharks, they could be unpredictable and were responsible for more attacks on humans than any other species. Their stocky build, powerful jaws, and strong swimming abilities made them particularly dangerous, especially when provoked or when food was scarce. As the boat anchored near a reef, the group eagerly jumped into the water, their snorkels and fins ready for the adventure. David and Emma were among the first to dive in, marveling at the bright coral and colorful fish that swarmed below. It felt surreal. Everything was peaceful, the ocean calm, and the group spread out around the reef, enjoying the underwater scenery. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. The group stayed relatively close, with the guides watching from the boat. But David, lost in the reef's beauty and unaware of the increasing distance between him and the others, had unknowingly drifted away. Engrossed in watching a school of fish, Emma hadn't noticed David's slow separation from the group either. David continued exploring farther from the boat's safety and out of sight of the guides. His breathing through the snorkel was steady as he glided over the reef, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. The dark shape of a bull shark appeared below him, just beyond his line of sight. It had picked up on David's movements, drawn by his splashing and the unfamiliar presence in its territory. The shark began circling from a distance. Watching, David swam farther from the group, completely oblivious that he was being stalked. It happened in an instant. As David adjusted his mask, unaware of the predator below, the bull shark surged forward, propelled by its powerful tail. In the blink of an eye, the massive shark was upon him. David felt a sudden sharp pain in his right arm, and his body went rigid with shock. Looking down, he saw the terrifying sight of the bull shark's jaws clamped around his arm, its rows of razor-sharp teeth slicing through skin and muscle easily. Panic took over. David thrashed in the water, desperately trying to free himself, but the shark's grip was too strong. It pulled him under, the force of its bite dragging him beneath the surface. His lungs burned as he struggled to get free, the salt water filling his mouth as he fought to hold on to his breath. Blood clouded the water around him, feeding the shark's aggression. Still unaware of what had happened, Emma finally noticed that David was missing from the group. She lifted her head out of the water, scanning for him, and saw the thrashing in the distance. Panic seized her as she realized something was wrong. She called out to the guides, who immediately sprang into action, racing to get the boat closer to where David was struggling. Meanwhile, David was losing strength. The shark had let go of his arm but began circling him again, preparing for another strike. David, desperate and in excruciating pain, kicked out wildly, his mind racing with fear. He knew that if the shark attacked again, he might not survive. His arm was bleeding heavily, the pain nearly unbearable, but the adrenaline coursing through his body kept him moving. As the shark circled back, David grabbed the only thing he had, his snorkel. It was a weak defense, but at that moment, it was all he could think of. The shark charged again, its mouth wide open, but David struck it on the snout with the snorkel as hard as he could. Surprised by the sudden hit, the shark recoiled slightly but wasn't deterred for long. It circled again, this time closer, its eyes locked onto its target. By this time, the boat had reached David. Armed with a long pole, one of the guides leaned over the edge, shouting for David to swim toward them. The other guide grabbed a rope, ready to pull David aboard as soon as he was close enough. David, barely able to see through the blood and salt water in his eyes, kicked with every last bit of energy, his arm numb from the blood loss. The shark relentlessly followed closely behind, its dorsal fin cutting through the water as it prepared to strike again. Just as it closed in, the guide jabbed the shark with the pole, driving it back long enough for David to reach the side of the boat. The other guide pulled him aboard in one swift motion, and the group watched in stunned silence as the bull shark swam in circles below, still searching for its prey. David collapsed onto the deck, his body shaking from the shock and the pain. His arm was torn, the deep gashes from the shark's teeth a grim reminder of how close he had come to losing his life. Wide-eyed and silent, the rest of the tourists gathered around as the guides raced to stop the bleeding and radioed for emergency help. David would survive, but the scars, both physical and mental, would stay with him forever. The Bahamas, once a place of beauty and adventure, had shown its darker side, and David knew he would never forget the terror of staring into the eyes of a bull shark. On September 16, 2024, The U.S. Navy vessel USS Archon was gliding through the cold waters of the North Atlantic. The ship was conducting routine patrols about 300 miles off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada, an area known for its unpredictable weather and its dense population of great white sharks. The vessel's crew, led by Commander Ethan Graves, had grown accustomed to the rhythm of these patrols. Long hours of monitoring the radar, scanning for submarines, and maintaining the vessel, and the day had started like any other, with the crew quietly going about their duties, unaware of the terror lurking beneath the waves. At around noon, the waters had grown eerily calm, a marked change from the usual choppy conditions in this region. The temperature had dropped noticeably as well, something that had caught the crew's attention. Yet nothing seemed particularly out of the ordinary. Commander Graves, a seasoned officer in his early 50s with decades of naval experience, stood at the bridge, reviewing reports and occasionally glancing out at the gray waters. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, and there was no sign of activity on the surface. Beneath those waters, however, something large and powerful was approaching. The North Atlantic was a known hunting ground for great white sharks, especially in the late summer and early fall when seals migrated through the region. These sharks could grow to incredible sizes, often reaching over 20 feet in length. They were apex predators, feared for their power and unpredictability. But none of the crew aboard the Archon could have anticipated what was about to happen. Just after lunch, as the crew carried on with their routines, a sudden jolt shook the ship. At first, everyone assumed it was a mechanical issue, a malfunction in the engine, or perhaps the ship striking a submerged object. But the tremor felt too forceful, too unnatural. Alarms began to blare as the vessel tilted slightly, sending men scrambling to check for damages. That's when the lookout, stationed at the front of the vessel, spotted something in the water. A dorsal fin, a massive, unmistakable dorsal fin, was slicing through the surface of the water, heading directly for the ship. Before anyone could react, the creature launched itself out of the water in a powerful breach, slamming its full weight against the hull with a thunderous impact. It was a great white shark, but unlike any the crew had ever seen before. This one was enormous, at least 25 feet long, its body covered in scars from years of battles in the wild. The shark's sheer size and force knocked several crew members off balance as the ship swayed from the impact. Commander Graves rushed to the bridge, barking orders for damage control, but it quickly became clear that the situation was dire. The shark struck again, this time ramming its snout into the ship's stern, denting the steel plating and causing the ship to take on water. The vessel, though built for combat and durability, was no match for the relentless power of the creature attacking it. The crew scrambled to initiate emergency repairs, working quickly to patch the damage as water began flooding into the lower decks. The great white circled the ship, its dark shadow visible beneath the surface. It moved with terrifying purpose, as though it was hunting the vessel itself. Sharks were known to breach boats, but never with this level of aggression. The crew was on edge, watching the water with growing dread. The shark breached again, this time closer to the bow, its jaws snapping at the air as it came crashing down against the hull. Metal groaned and screeched as the shark's massive body collided with the ship again and again. Inside the ship, panic was beginning to set in. The damage to the hull was extensive, and the repairs were not holding as well as they had hoped. Several compartments had already been sealed off to prevent further flooding, but the situation was growing more dangerous by the minute. Commander Graves ordered the crew to abandon non-essential areas of the ship and focus all efforts on keeping the vessel afloat. They worked with frantic energy, the constant fear of another attack driving them forward. As the shark circled back for yet another strike, the crew in the engine room heard a deep, resonant thud. The force of the shark's impact had caused one of the main generators to short out, cutting power to parts of the ship. Lights flickered, and the vessel slowed to a crawl as engineers struggled to get the systems back online. Above deck, the crew was now fully aware of the scale of the threat. The great white shark was acting with a level of aggression and persistence they had never encountered before. Commander Graves kept his eyes fixed on the water, his mind racing with possibilities. Sharks were opportunistic feeders, driven by instinct and hunger. But this attack felt different. It was more deliberate, almost like the shark was reacting to some unseen force. He thought back to recent briefings about the changing conditions in the ocean. Rising temperatures, depleting fish stocks, and shifts in migration patterns were causing disruptions in marine ecosystems all over the world. Could these environmental changes be affecting shark behavior? Was this great white lashing out because its natural food sources were dwindling? The shark attacked again, breaching high out of the water and slamming down onto the deck of the ship. The impact was so severe that it crushed part of the railing and sent debris flying. Several crew members were knocked to the ground by the force of the blow, and the shark's enormous body thrashed violently before sliding back into the water. The boat rocked dangerously, its balance compromised by the repeated strikes. As the crew worked to stabilize the vessel, they noticed something even more unsettling. Sharks were gathering around the ship. Smaller sharks, perhaps drawn by the noise and disturbance, were circling the area, their dorsal fins breaking the surface. The great white continued its assault, undeterred by the ship's defenses. Every few minutes it would breach again, striking the vessel with terrifying precision as if it were determined to sink it. The crew fought to keep the ship afloat, patching the damage as quickly as possible. But the shark showed no signs of relenting. The water around the ship was churning with activity as the predators closed in. Commander Graves knew they had little time left. The crew needed to find a way to deter the shark before the ship was irreparably damaged. They activated sonar pulses designed to repel large marine life, hoping it would be enough to drive the great white away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the shark began to retreat. The sonar pulses seemed to disrupt its behavior, causing it to swim off into the deep, followed by the smaller sharks. The water grew still again, but the damage had been done. The USS Archon was severely compromised. Its hull was battered, and the relentless attack shook the crew. As the ship limped back toward the coast for repairs, Commander Graves couldn't shake the thought that something was changing in the ocean. The attack wasn't just a random encounter. It was a sign of a larger shift. Environmental changes were driving these predators to new extremes, and the balance between humans and the ocean's apex predators was becoming dangerously fragile. On the morning of August 5, 2021, the commercial fishing fleet based out of Chatham, Massachusetts, set out for a routine day of work off the coast of Cape Cod. The fleet, led by Captain Ron Walsh of the Silver Marlin, had been fishing these waters for decades. Cape Cod was famous for its abundant marine life, and the summer season was always prime for fishing. The boats targeted tuna, haddock, and swordfish, using heavy baited lines that often brought in impressive catches. But this year, things had felt different. There had been rumors of increased shark activity in the area, particularly sightings of mako sharks, fast, powerful predators known for their speed and aggressive nature. The fishermen were cautious, but no one was prepared for what was about to unfold. Ron Walsh had seen his fair share of sharks over the years. At 48, he was experienced and level-headed, running a tight operation with his crew. That morning, the weather was fair and the sea was calm as the fleet reached their fishing grounds about 20 miles offshore. Ron and his crew set about their tasks, dropping lines and setting bait. The radio crackled with chatter from the other boats in the fleet, all reporting good conditions and a steady start to the day. By noon, the catch was coming in strong. The crew of the Silver Marlin worked efficiently, pulling in line after line of tuna, their coolers quickly filling. But as they hauled in their nets, something began to feel off. The water around the boat started to churn with unusual intensity, and small fish scattered frantically, fleeing from an unseen threat. Ron noticed the change and immediately thought of the sharks. The first mako appeared just as the crew was pulling in a particularly large tuna. The sleek, torpedo-shaped body of the shark darted toward the boat at incredible speed, drawn by the scent of the bait and the thrashing fish. Ron yelled for his crew to pull the lines in faster, but the shark was already too close. With a sudden burst of speed, the mako lunged at the tuna, its jaws snapping shut around the fish just as it was being lifted out of the water. The crew watched in shock as the shark tore the tuna in half, sending a spray of blood and water across the deck. Panic rippled through the fleet as more mako sharks appeared, drawn by the commotion. The sleek predators began circling the boats, their eyes locked on the fishermen and their catch. The crew scrambled to pull in the remaining lines, but the sharks were relentless. One of the makos charged the side of the Silver Marlin, its powerful body slamming into the hull with a force that rattled the entire boat. Several crew members lost their balance, stumbling as the shark circled back for another hit. Meanwhile, across the fleet, other boats were facing the same crisis. The Makos were targeting the baited lines, and the fish caught on them, leaping out of the water to snatch their prey directly from the hooks. The fishermen tried to fend them off with poles and gaffs, but the sharks were too fast, darting in and out of range with terrifying precision. One of the smaller boats in the fleet, the Blue Runner, was struck by a particularly large Mako, which tore through the side of the vessel, damaging its engine and leaving the boat dead in the water. On the Silver Marlin, things were getting worse. Another shark had latched onto one of the lines, pulling with such force that it threatened to drag a crew member overboard. Ron and another crewman rushed to help, cutting the line before the shark could do any more damage. But the sharks were becoming more aggressive, their feeding frenzy spiraling out of control. One of the crew, a young deckhand named Eric, was struck by a shark's thrashing tail, sending him sprawling across the deck. He lay there, dazed and bleeding from a gash on his head as the sharks continued their assault. Ron knew they couldn't keep this up. The sharks were relentless, and the fleet was suffering severe damage. He called out on the radio, urging the other boats to start pulling in their lines and retreat to safer waters. But the Makos were everywhere now, and the crew's attempts to drive them away were failing. Several boats reported damage to their hulls and equipment, with crew members injured from the sharks' violent attacks. As the fleet tried to regroup, marine biologists from a nearby research vessel, led by Dr. Nora Caldwell, arrived to assess the situation. They had been tracking the movements of the Mako sharks in the area for weeks, studying their behavior and migration patterns. Dr. Caldwell was alarmed by the reports coming in from the fishing fleet. She knew Makos could be aggressive when provoked, but the level of aggression the fishermen were describing was unprecedented. After contacting Ron and the other captains, Dr. Caldwell suggested a strategy to help mitigate the attacks. The Makos were being drawn in by the scent of the fish and the vibrations caused by the boat's engines and equipment. To deter them, she advised the fleet to deploy acoustic devices that emitted a high-pitched sound known to repel sharks. It wasn't a guaranteed solution, but it was the only non-lethal option available to help the fishermen protect their boats and themselves. The fleet quickly set to work deploying the devices, attaching them to the sides of their boats and along their lines. The effect was almost immediate. The sharks, disoriented by the sound, began to retreat, their frenzied movements slowing as they moved away from the boats. Within an hour, the attacks had ceased, and the Makos had dispersed into deeper waters. The day had been disastrous for the fleet. Several boats had sustained heavy damage, and the fishing operations had been severely disrupted. Ron and the other captains knew they were facing a difficult season ahead. The Makos were still out there, and there was no telling when they might return. The cost of the damaged equipment and lost catch weighed heavily on their minds. Still, they also understood that the sharks were not the enemy. They were part of the ecosystem that had been pushed to the brink by overfishing and environmental changes. On July 18, 2015, the Florida Keys were buzzing with excitement. It was the day of the annual high-speed jet ski race off the coast of Marathon, a small town known for its stunning waters and vibrant marine life. Spectators had lined the shore, cheering as racers from across the country prepared to compete in one of the most thrilling water events in the region. Among them was Jake Carter, a seasoned racer who had been training for months. The weather was perfect, and the waters looked calm, ideal conditions for the competition. By mid-morning, the race had started. Jet skis roared across the water, sending up waves as racers weaved through the course's buoys. The participants were focused, adrenaline pumping as they pushed their machines to the limit, reaching speeds of up to 60 miles per hour. The atmosphere was electric, with the sound of engines mixing with the excited cheers from the crowd. Jake was in the zone, staying neck and neck with the race leader, eyes on the finish line. But beneath the surface, something was amiss. The waters off the Florida Keys were known to be home to a variety of sharks, including blacktip sharks, which were common in these waters. Typically, blacktips were not aggressive toward humans unless provoked. However, the commotion from the race, churning water, the loud motors, and the constant vibrations, was drawing the sharks closer to the action. As the racers rounded one of the final buoys, disaster struck. A large blacktip shark, agitated by the activity, became entangled in one of the floating buoys used to mark the course. Thrashing violently in an attempt to free itself, the shark collided with the jet skis speeding by. The first racer to encounter the shark was thrown off his machine as the shark's powerful tail struck him across the chest. The impact sent him sprawling into the water, dazed and bleeding from a gash on his shoulder. Jake, unaware of the chaos unfolding ahead, sped toward the same area. He saw the splash and the racers struggling to stay afloat, but didn't realize the danger beneath the water until it was too late. The black-tip shark, still frantic, lunged upward, its teeth grazing Jake's leg as it surged past him. The sharp pain shot through Jake's body as he lost control of his jet ski, tumbling into the water just feet away from the injured shark. Panic erupted among the other racers as they saw the shark thrashing and the injured men in the water. Spectators on the shore screamed in alarm. Their cheers turned to cries of fear as the realization of the shark's presence spread. The race organizers, stationed in boats along the course, quickly called for an emergency halt to the event, signaling the racers to retreat to safety. But the shark, still caught in the buoy line, continued its aggressive behavior. Two more racers, trying to steer clear of the chaos, were knocked off their jet skis as the shark thrashed wildly. One of them, a woman named Kelly Harper, felt the shark's body brush against her as she struggled to stay above water, her life vest the only thing keeping her afloat. Her leg was bruised and bloodied from the impact, but she managed to swim toward one of the rescue boats that had sped toward the scene. The rescue crews moved swiftly, pulling the injured racers from the water as the blacktip shark finally broke free from the buoy. The shark, disoriented and stressed, swam away from the scene, leaving behind a trail of blood and confusion. On shore, paramedics rushed to treat the injured participants. The shark's teeth had deeply cut Jake's leg, and another racer had suffered a concussion from the force of being thrown off his jet ski. The race was officially called off, and the atmosphere shifted from excitement to tension as everyone processed what had just happened. Local marine authorities, along with experts from a nearby marine biology institute, were called in to investigate the incident. Blacktip sharks, while normally not a serious threat to humans, had been known to become aggressive when stressed or agitated. The commotion of the high-speed race had likely disturbed the shark's natural behavior, causing it to act out aggressively. As the day wore on, event organizers met with the marine experts to discuss the incident and the measures that needed to be taken to prevent future occurrences. There had been a growing concern in the community about the increasing interaction between marine life and human activities, especially in areas like the Florida Keys, where tourism and water sports were common. The event exposed the delicate balance between adrenaline-fueled sports and the need to protect the marine environment. The race's cancellation was a blow to the participants and the organizers, but safety was the priority. The injuries, though painful, were not life-threatening, and all the racers were expected to recover. Jake, lying on a stretcher with his leg bandaged, reflected on the experience with a mix of fear and relief. He had been in dangerous situations before, but nothing compared to the raw power of the shark that had come so close to ending his race, and possibly his life. In the weeks that followed, local authorities worked with marine experts to develop new safety protocols for future water events. They implemented stricter guidelines for race courses in shark-populated waters, including monitoring systems that could detect large marine animals in the area before events began. The incident sparked a broader conversation about the intersection of human recreation and wildlife conservation, with many calling for more awareness of the impact that high-energy activities could have on marine life, emphasizing the need for preventive measures in popular water activities. On August 26, 2024, a U.S. Coast Guard team was conducting a routine patrol 15 miles offshore off the coast of California. It was supposed to be an ordinary training exercise they had done many times before. Lieutenant Jason McCall was in charge, a seasoned officer leading a team of 5, including Petty Officer Sam Henderson, Seaman First Class Mike Daniels, and 2 recruits, Sarah Jenkins and Tom Bradley. Their mission was straightforward: practice rescue drills, prepare for emergencies, and ensure the crew's readiness for real-life situations. The day started uneventfully with the crew reviewing procedures, checking equipment, and running drills. They were operating near an area known for its rich marine life. The waters off the coast of California are home to various aquatic animals, including seals, dolphins, and great white sharks. The area near the Farallon Islands, about 30 miles from their location, was notorious for frequent shark activity, especially during migration seasons. Great whites in this region can grow over 20 feet long and are apex predators known for their powerful attacks and stealthy hunting tactics. Despite knowing these facts, the crew didn't expect any danger. They focused on their exercise and were confident in the safety of the routine. As the drills continued, everything seemed normal, until Petty Officer Sam Henderson noticed something strange. A soft jolt ran through the boat as they bumped into something. He scanned the waters around them, seeing nothing at first. However, a large shadow soon emerged beneath the surface, slowly circling the boat. He alerted Jason, and both recognized the dark outline. It was a great white shark. At first, it seemed like a passing predator, curious but non-threatening. Still, they grew uneasy. The shark didn't swim away. Instead, it started circling the boat more aggressively, its movements tightening as it swam closer. Jason ordered the crew to stay alert, but no one anticipated what came next. The shark suddenly rammed the side of the boat, sending a shockwave through the hull. The crew, unprepared for the impact, stumbled as the boat shook violently. Sam rushed to check for damage while the recruits scrambled to secure themselves. The vessel had sustained a blow, but the extent of the damage wasn't immediately clear. Before they could react, the shark struck again, harder this time. The force of the second impact nearly knocked everyone off their feet. Standing too close to the edge, Mike Daniels lost his balance and was thrown overboard. His fall was sudden and chaotic, splashing into the water as the rest of the crew screamed his name. He surfaced quickly, flailing in the water, trying to grab hold of anything to stay afloat. The shark was already circling, drawn to the movement in the water. The crew moved quickly to throw Mike a life ring, but the shark was closing in faster than anyone expected. Blood from the impact was already spreading in the water, and the predator was relentless. The team had only seconds to pull Mike out before the situation escalated. Jason knew they were in trouble. The shark was not behaving like typical predators in these waters. It seemed more aggressive, deliberately targeting the boat. Sam tried to keep the crew calm, but the panic was growing. With Mike in the water, the danger had become very real. The crew braced for the worst as the shark circled closer, its dorsal fin cutting through the surface like a blade. Mike struggled to stay above the water as the shark made its first pass. The crew could see the predator circling him, its movements controlled and deliberate. The situation was deteriorating quickly. Jason ordered the team to pull Mike back on board, but the shark wasn't giving them time. It lunged at Mike, its powerful jaws snapping shut around his leg. The water turned red as the shark dragged him under, its body twisting violently beneath the surface. For a few moments, Mike disappeared from view. The crew stood frozen, horrified by the scene unfolding before them. Then, miraculously, Mike resurfaced, gasping for air. His leg was severely injured, the blood pouring from the wound into the water, but he was still alive. The shark, however, wasn't done. It was circling for another attack, drawn by the fresh blood and the thrashing movements in the water. The crew threw another life ring toward Mike, desperately trying to pull him out before the shark made its next move. Sam readied a harpoon gun, his hands shaking as he aimed for the shark. He fired, but the shot missed. The shark turned sharply, its dorsal fin visible again as it prepared to strike. Jason and Tom tied a rope and prepared to haul Mike out quickly. Just as they began to pull him in, the shark lunged again, its jaws snapping shut just inches from Mike's arm. The sheer size and power of the great white were overwhelming. The boat rocked as the predator rammed the side again, causing more damage to the hull. Water started to leak into the lower deck, but the crew had no time to deal with it. Their focus was on saving Mike before the shark could finish him off. In a desperate move, Sam fired another harpoon, this time hitting the shark in its side. The predator recoiled, thrashing in the water as the harpoon embedded itself into its thick skin. The shark twisted violently, the water churning around it as it tried to shake off the attack. This gave Jason and Tom the precious seconds to pull Mike out of the water. They dragged him onto the deck, his leg mangled and bleeding heavily. The shark continued to thrash below, but it wasn't finished. It made one last attempt to ram the boat, but the damage was done. With Mike on board, Jason steered the ship toward the shore, trying to outrun the predator. The shark, injured but still relentless, followed them for a few hundred yards before finally retreating into the depths. The boat was damaged, barely holding together as they limped toward safety. Mike lay on the deck, his face pale from shock and blood loss. His leg was a mess of torn flesh and muscle, but the bleeding had slowed. Jason and Sam wrapped the wound tightly, doing their best to keep him stable as they pushed the damaged boat forward. As the coastline appeared in the distance, the crew breathed a sigh of relief. They had survived, but the memory of the attack would stay with them forever. The image of the shark's dark shadow, its sudden attack, and the sight of Mike being dragged underwater were seared into their minds. The routine patrol had turned into a nightmare, one that none of them would forget.